Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, Tony Sertich. It's been another busy week at the state capitol in St. Paul with the second deadline Friday for bills to become state law before the end of the session. This afternoon, you'll have a chance to ask questions of the lawmakers who represent you. Call the number on your screen or email questions to ask@wdsc.org. We have great guests to answer those questions today. First, Senator Tom Bakk is an independent from Cook who represents Senate District 3. Welcome, Senator Bakk.
Thank you.
And Representative Mike Sundin is a DFLer from Esko representing House District 11A. Welcome, Representative Sundin. Great to have you both here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll start in the House as we normally do. Representative Sundin, a question for the viewers just to get to know you a little better. Why did you run for office for the House for the first time? You started Cloquet School Board, but why did you decide to run for the House of Representatives?
Well, prior to the school board episode, I've always been active in the labor community and served my local union and district council in many capacities. And I just thought this would be the next step in improving working conditions for not only my trade and all the construction trades, but labor in general. And I've been successful in doing so.
Great. Quarter century ago, a little more than that, Senator Bakk, why'd you get into elected office?
My path was pretty similar. I was in 1994 when Representative Battaglia from Two Harbors decided to retire. I was a business representative for the Carpenters Union on the range, and I was the president of the Iron Range Building and Construction Trades Council. And it just seemed like a natural progression from union leadership into politics for the same reason that Mike stated is if your goal is to improve the standard of living for working class people, you transition from working for a local union that's doing that, negotiating contracts and working conditions, to the legislature where you hope you can make even a bigger impact. Yeah. And that still is kind of in the front of my mind kind of every session is how can we make it a little better place for the people to pack a lunch bucket and go to work every day. Great,
and we'll talk about a lot of those issues today. And just as a reminder, please email or call in your questions for your legislators, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. We're going to start, as we did last week, with a few of the issues that were left over even from last legislative session. And the two that have been somewhat interconnected for some people are the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund and the Frontline worker issue. And Senator Bakk, can you give us an update on where we're at? The Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund is in deficit, and if it stays in deficit, businesses have to pay a additional tax to go in there. Deed says we've passed the deadline. We're still at a deadlock between the legislature and the governor. Can you give an update on that?
Well, what happens with the unemployment fund is employers pay a payroll tax into it, and that's what funds participants that draw unemployment. And if we ever get into a situation where the fund is not stable and runs out of money, it automatically triggers borrowing from the federal government. And in this case, the borrowing happened because of all the layoffs related to the pandemic. And we've got about a $1.2 billion loan that's due to the federal government that employers are going to be assessed on a surcharge on top of the regular unemployment payment they make to the state fund to start paying back that federal loan. That's going to happen now in April. We've been in this situation a number of times. Anytime we get high levels of unemployment, that borrowing automatically is triggered and employers end up paying it back. I think the reason this time for there being so much attention to this is it wasn't the employer's fault that they had to lay people off. The governor basically shut down main streets, closed the schools, and a whole lot of businesses, all the restaurants, all the bars, were put in a situation of having to lay everybody off. So it seems that they shouldn't carry the brunt of having to repay the federal loan when it wasn't any of their doing. They weren't voluntary layoffs that the company was doing. So the governor proposed in his budget to use $2.7 billion of the surplus. That is the federal loan plus what was in the account when the pandemic started. There was a balance in there. So he proposed $2.7 billion. The Senate passed that, back, early in the session, we passed the same provision that the governor had proposed. The House hasn't taken that up yet. As often happens at the legislature, things end up getting linked. And there was a deal made last summer to provide $250 million of stipends to frontline workers. And at the time we were thinking mostly about people working in healthcare that had to work through the pandemic, that we were going to give them a stipend of $250 million. The House, once they saw that the budget surplus get so big, they kind of raised the bar and want to do more than $250 million. So the two issues have now gotten linked. If we're going to do for the business community, the unemployment fund, we should do for those frontline workers that bonus pay for them. So we're just kind of stuck there. I actually suggested to the governor last week, and he said, Tom, that's a good idea. I said, it seems to me, Governor, there is a deal. Let's do 1.2 billion, the actual loan amount, not 2.7, 1.2, and then let's do the 250 million that everybody agreed to last August. I'd like to think that that's kind of the compromise, but so far, leaders have been talking about that, and it hasn't developed yet. But the governor did tell me that he would support that. So I'm hoping that maybe this week before the break they can come to an agreement and get that done.
Great. And so Senate passed the UI, unemployment insurance, the House frontline workers. Where are we at in the House on these two issues?
Just to fill you in, I actually serve on the Workers' Comp Advisory Council, and it's been an education for me on how things work there. And to add on to what Senator Bakk has just mentioned, we established a presumption of for the COVID workers. If it was presumed if you're in a high-risk occupation such as nursing or police, law enforcement, fire department, emergency services, that if you were to fall ill, it was automatically presumed that you got it at work. So the COVID at work. So those numbers actually elevated the number of people on the workers' comp as well. So it's like the senator said, everything's interconnected.
Yep. Great. The other outstanding issue goes with reinsurance, and bill got passed in a bipartisan way, signed by the governor. Representative Sundin, we'll start with you to talk about the importance of passing that reinsurance bill.
That was very contentious amongst some people, and it just are you bailing out these insurance companies, and it's a massive amount of money going in to bail out insurance companies, and we're kind of between a hard place and a rock, and it's just something you have to do to preserve the health coverage for so many people.
Yep. Senator Bakk.
Well, let me just say I support Obamacare. But the truth is, when it was passed, largely because of the provision in there that says insurance companies have to cover pre-existing conditions, which is a good provision in that, probably the best provision in that whole health plan, it raised premiums about 15%. It's a big cost item. So in order to cushion some of those premium increases, the legislature several years ago created this reinsurance program for people that don't get their insurance through their employer. So if they've got to go on the healthcare exchange and buy insurance, we actually are paying some money to insurance companies to help hold premiums down for those people that don't get it through their regular employment. So it's a good program. The Senate wanted to extend reinsurance for 5 years. The House didn't want to go that far, so we compromised on 3. So the extension that we passed and the governor just signed is for a 3-year period to extend the reinsurance program. And we use some general fund money and some money out of the healthcare access fund that pays for Minnesota Care.
Great. Thanks. And just a reminder again, folks, please call or write in, email in with any questions you have. This session is generally the second year. It's not a budget year, though there's a large budget surplus. The main order of business is a capital investment or bonding bill. And I have two retired card-carrying union members here, so hopefully we can get into the meat of this. And we have the chair of the Capital Investment Committee in the Senate. So Senator Bakk, do you want to talk about what you're thinking about size of the bill, importance of the bill, some kind of broad parameters of why you feel this is important this session?
Well, I've always supported bonding bills, and because I'm out of the trades, and it creates a lot of construction employment. And I often tell members of the different trades unions to just think about your career as you've worked through a career in one of the trades, whether it's in the painters or in the carpenters in my case. Think about all the public buildings you worked on. Courthouses and schools and libraries and colleges and roads and bridges and wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants. Public infrastructure spending on construction is a significant piece of the industry. And I think we're going to get a bill this year. Everybody seems to want one. All the leaders seem to want one. The size of it, I don't know yet. I'd like to do something about the size that we did in 2020, which that year was about 1.35 billion of GO bonds, general obligation bonds. And then there were some additional trunk highway bonds and some other types of bonds in there, but it's the GO number that we always look closely at. If we did a bill that size, the debt service on it would be about $9 million next year, but then it rises to about $76 million a year in the 2 years beyond that. The budget, the state budget, our structural balance is plenty strong to be able to support that. Hope to be able to get that. In the Senate, I don't know exactly where the House is going to be on that, but the Senate's always at a handicap in bonding bills because the Constitution says that any bill that puts the state in debt has to originate in the House. So the House really has to pass something. The Senate can't be unconstitutional for the Senate to take the lead on it. So we always have to wait for the House on that. The same is true for tax bills. They have to originate in the House, bills that affect revenue. So I know I spent 5 weeks on the road traveling all around the state with the committee, looking at projects. We looked at 170 or so projects around the state. There's a lot more than that. The Department of Administration and the governor's people, I think they've received about $5 billion of actual requests from local units of government for projects and state agencies. So we're not going to be able to do anything near what the need is out there. But it was pretty surprising to me traveling around. There's a tremendous amount of wastewater infrastructure. And we all want our wastewater treatment plants to have as clean a discharge as possible. All over the state, small towns, bigger towns, they need to make significant improvements in wastewater. And if the state doesn't help with that, it gets put on the monthly bill of Minnesotans. And in most cases, a bill too high for most people to afford. So the state's got a partner in that with local governments making those improvements. Our state colleges and universities, especially our two-year campuses, the whole technical college system was built in the 70s. And so the buildings now are 50 years old. There's a tremendous amount of maintenance to be done on all of our state college buildings around the state and at the University of Minnesota. We've got to keep up with that stuff because maintenance doesn't get cheaper. The longer you ignore it, the more a building deteriorates and it ends up costing more later. And the state agencies too, same thing. The Department of Natural Resources owns more buildings in the state than anybody. And same thing, they're just way, way behind in maintenance in all of our state-owned buildings also, in addition to the colleges and universities. So the Senate bill will be really heavy on deferred maintenance, on publicly owned facilities, on wastewater, on roads and bridges, transportation. And you can get to $1 billion pretty fast that way.
Sure. Great. Representative Sundin, views from the House, size of the bill, and any particular projects that you're looking to push forward from your district?
Several. We can boost that up anytime. It's great. We came from the same background there, but you have to remember this is a property of the state of Minnesota. You take care of your house, you take care of your cars, everything you own, you take care of, and the state of Minnesota should take care of their facilities as well. We have the prisons to look after and maintain. And the schools, the roads, it's all an investment in the future of Minnesota. And that said, people should remember, sure, it's a big number, but that money is spent right here in Minnesota on Minnesota wages, on the suppliers that supply the bricks and the mortar for these projects. And this is good for business, it's good for labor, it's good for the future of the state of Minnesota. And any dollar you expend, it stays right here in Minnesota, so it's not wasted money ever.
I've often wondered, when we do a construction project and all the people in the trades go to work on it, they pay a lot of income taxes because they're not low-income jobs. They're very, very family-sustaining jobs. So a lot of income tax ends up coming back to us that covers a pretty big piece of the debt service, because if you didn't authorize the project, the man hours of construction wouldn't be there, so the income tax wouldn't be there. To some extent, a bonding bill kind of pays for itself, and the sales tax that people pay and the income tax that the individuals who actually perform the work pay.
Good point.
Yeah, I believe it's called a virtuous economic cycle.
Nice. Well, I learned something today.
Yes.
So, Senator Bakk, as somebody who chairs the committee and is in charge for passing this bill, the bonding bill also requires a supermajority vote out of both bodies, which means bipartisan, just the way the numbers are. How do you think about that when you're putting a bill together? And I'm going to be coming to you to talk about the Ag Committee, but with a supermajority needed, how do you think about that? You talked a bit about what your priorities are, kind of the buckets of them, but in putting a bill together that needs to pass bipartisan supermajority, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a little bit easier in a year like this where there's a lot of retirements, because historically what has happened is the bonding chair counts their majority votes that they have, and in that case I've got 36. I need 5 more in the Senate. So historically what's happened is the bonding chair will kind of sweeten the bill with some projects in somebody's district to try and buy their vote. That's been less successful recently as the caucuses have gotten more rigid and a little more unwilling to compromise. It's been harder to get people to kind of break away from the caucus. But I think that probably will be different this year when you have so many retirements. I've got to count to 5. And it's easier for somebody that's not running again to try and get something significant done for their district. They don't care as much about the unity in the caucus because they're not going to be there next year. So I don't think it's going to be difficult finding the 5 votes that I need to get it done. And then the House is always a little harder. In the House, I believe they need 11 Republicans in the House, so in order to get it done. But I think they'll probably have the same kind of approach, I think.
Great. Representative Sundin, you are the chair of the Agriculture Committee.
Yes.
Your big bill is going to be heard actually tomorrow.
Exactly. We're rolling it out tomorrow.
Yeah. Can we get a preview of what to expect in that bill? Things you're proud of, things you're pushing forward.
Well, the House bills. I'm going to back it up a year. Last year the Ag Committee, my committee, was the first one out with their bill, and we were on time before the regular deadline, and we didn't extend it into August or September or anything like that. But very proud of that, and it was also the most bipartisan bill. So there's a lot of cooperation on the committee, and I expect very similar results this year. And I guess the difference between the big ag bills that we were typically seeing were reaching into the inner city and some of this urban farming and smaller farm operations, trying to get some of the immigrants involved and boost their participation. If you drive down University Avenue in St. Paul, you'd be amazed at the vendors out there. These smaller vendors are actually supplying a heck of a lot of food throughout the state. You see CSAs and farm groups out throughout the state, but it's a major thing down in the Twin Cities. So we're trying to foster those smaller farms. We've also got a little bit of a snarl going on with this disaster or the drought relief. It's a smaller bill, but we want to get that out probably this week, and we're looking for compromise on that as well. The governor's got some ideas. The Senate has, I would say, very, very little input on this. I'm disappointed with some of the ideas that aren't coming out of the Senate. So we got plenty to work on, and looking forward to getting my bill out first in the most bipartisan fashion.
And generally, the agriculture bill tends to be a bipartisan bill in your time. You've probably seen that as well.
I don't want to say it's easy to pass, but it is generally the first of all the budget bills, of about a dozen budget bills, that's passed. It's one of the smaller ones. Even in 2011, when we went into a 21-day government shutdown, tough time, the ag bill passed on June 30th before the shutdown happened. So it's a bill that always attracts some bipartisan compromise, and in the case of drought relief, or now we got avian flu coming again into our turkey population, and people should know that Minnesota produces more turkeys than any state in the country. It's big business in Minnesota. We're second or third in hogs, but we're a big ag state, and so any kind of drought or things like the avian flu issue that impact our agriculture industry is a big deal in Minnesota, and a big deal in the country, because we produce so much.
You want to talk about the avian flu and anything that may be in your bill to help with that?
Well, yeah, we saw in 2015, a very crippling episode of the flu hit Minnesota farmers and barns, and it was just a disastrous situation where the barn would be diagnosed with the avian flu, and they'd have to smother those animals, and millions and millions of critters were lost, turkeys, chickens, and in the egg industry it was damaged. Luckily, some of the surrounding states survived it far better than we did, so there wasn't a break in the food chain. But the prices of turkey, it did go up, and it affects all the consumers.
Great. Well, we've got a bunch of questions now in from our viewers, and so I'm going to start with this one. A viewer wants to know, and Senator Bakk, if you wouldn't mind starting here, what's going on with the state retirement funds that were or could be invested in Russia? Do you want to just give a real quick update on the bill that was passed?
Well, yeah, that's we're going to divest of everything we have in Russia. All of our state agencies are not going to be able to do any work over there anymore. That's a good thing. I think what's going to be interesting to watch is how long an attention span people have, because the Ukrainian-Russian thing is going to resolve itself. And how long will it take, or will trading partners just go back to normal? I hope not. I hope that there's a serious lesson for a regime like Russia in this, that the world's just not going to go back to business as usual. But the European countries especially are pretty dependent on them. It's about 10% of the crude oil produced in the world. And if you saw what happened to the price of nickel, I mean, Russia produces a lot of nickel. You have to have nickel, cobalt, and lithium to produce a battery for an electric vehicle. The price of nickel in the first few weeks of that war over there went up by 130%. We wouldn't have stainless steel if it wasn't for nickel, and we produce almost none in this country. So I'm hoping that one of the places Minnesota could benefit is, it'll be interesting to see if people start to look at global trade a little differently than they do right now. Right now, I think the sentiment has been that global trade's a good thing, but it seems like there's some risk to your national security if you start to become dependent on countries that aren't stable, right? And I don't know how stable China is. Certainly they would like to have Taiwan back. Everybody knows that. 60% of the computer chips in the world are made in Taiwan. If China were to take Taiwan back, I don't know if we could make a car in this country anymore, much less anything else that needs a computer chip. So there's a lot of areas in our economy, I think we've let ourselves become awful vulnerable because of all this global trade. And I hope that we learn a lesson from that and we start to bring some of the manufacturing that we've pushed offshore and the critical metals that we've allowed to be developed elsewhere when we have them here in the ground in our country. I hope we start to think about not becoming too vulnerable to other places around the world that aren't that stable.
Yeah. Representative Sundin, anything to add?
Fully agree with what the Senator has said, but if we're going to start manufacturing more products, that we do need, we need the people to do it. Right now, we're in a labor shortage in the United States, and we've got to get an influx of people into the labor force and train them properly to do these jobs. Because I grew up in a family with 8 kids. That was pretty common back in the day, but you don't see that anymore. We used to make our own workforce, but now we're going to have to import some.
Yes. A lot of other questions coming up. This one, Representative Sundin, comes to you. You are carrying a bill that will provide funding to reintroduce elk in Minnesota. Had a committee hearing last week. How's that issue coming along?
It's an interesting bill. It came out of the Fond du Lac tribe of Ojibwe, and I was happy to carry that bill. We're going to look at that and see if we can. They're looking for $1 million to reintroduce elk. I was talking to Representative Eklund about this. We're roommates as well, so we get to chat about this quite a little bit. And he told me a story about walking through the woods, and he saw these trails. They're caribou trails. Well, it's been centuries since we really had caribou in Minnesota, but I don't see any problem with reintroducing some of these native species to the state. The difficulty, I guess the difficulty I'm having with the elk is, they're susceptible to that chronic wasting disease, just like our white-tailed deer herd. And I'd hate to threaten that white-tailed deer herd or what's left of them with that disease. So to their credit, I will say the Fond du Lac Band is asked to cooperate with the DNR and make certain if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. So we're not reintroducing any diseased animals into the population. It might be a few years off, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Great. Senator Bakk?
Well, I don't have an opinion on elk, but what I do think we should put some effort into is bringing back Minnesota's moose population. And it's as simple as doing something with predator control. I mean, we spent millions of dollars on collaring wolves, collaring moose to figure out why is there all this mortality going on, and we learned that about 2 out of 3 calves that are born are either killed by timber wolves or by black bears. Mm-hmm. So something has to happen on the predator side if we're ever going to bring our moose population back, and I hope to live long enough to see that happen. I was fortunate. I've actually shot 2 moose in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. I got a license back in 1994, and then I had to sit out about 12 years or so, and I got another license. So I was one of the lucky people that shot 2. It's a pretty short list, but we haven't had a season now for a number of years. And it's interesting because if you look at what's happened, we didn't have any moose, and then the timber wolves were almost wiped out, and the moose population came back, roaring back in the 70s. And there was a period in the late 70s and 80s and into the mid 90s where the success rate in the moose season was like 80-some%. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of moose around. Mm-hmm. And then what happened as a result of the timber wolves being put on the Endangered Species Act, that wolf population continued to grow. And we went from a few hundred wolves to several thousand wolves. And as that population grew, the population of moose went down. It's a natural cycle. You've seen it happen on Isle Royale also. I hope that someone's going to take that on someday, because the moose is such a majestic animal, and it's really quite a joy to be able to shoot one. And I'd like to see that opportunity available to Minnesotans in the future.
Absolutely.
This is kind of where we part ways, Tom. You like moose, I like shooting elk. They're a pretty tasty critter, but I agree wholeheartedly that predator control is, an issue that we have to address better. It's growing up north of you, up in Couchiching County. That it was so common to see timber wolves, and then now you don't see the other animals that they feed on. So you raise a good point. Predator control needs to be addressed.
Great. Well, we've got a ton of questions around property taxes, and so I'm going to kind of try to put them all together and have you guys talk about it. Senator Bakk, former tax chair, sit on the tax committee currently. A lot of questions about property taxes, in particular around seniors. Seniors living on a fixed income, really trying to square the circle on how can you afford to stay in your home when the taxes go up and your cost of living kind of stays the same. So what do you see as potential opportunities for property tax relief, at least from what the state can control?
Well, most of the problem that people are experiencing is rising valuations. The property tax is, it's related to your asset, right? And as your value of your asset goes up, your property taxes go up. So much of what you see happening, it's not the fault of the county or the local unit of government, or the school for that matter. It's an issue of rising valuation, especially if you live on or near a lake. And even our forest land property now is going up exponentially. And I think that's going to continue to happen as some of this remote work that's going on is going to continue into the future. So more people are going to be able to spend a little bit more time at the cabin than they have in the past. So there'll be more demand, I think, for property up in northern Minnesota. I just want to remind people, the state has two programs for property taxes. One is the property tax refund program. So if your property taxes are high in relation to your income, you file out the property tax refund application by August, I believe, and then the state will send you a check, and you'll get part of your property taxes rebated back to you. The other one that we have, and that you don't see happen a lot, except you're going to see it happen more now the way valuations are going up. If your valuation, if you didn't make any improvements to your property, and the valuation of your property went up by more than 12%, there's a form you can fill out, and the state will rebate to you 60% of the tax increase that is attributable to a more than 12% increase in your valuation. So if your valuation goes up by, 20, 25, 30, I get some emails, 50%. If you go through the process, you can get some of that rebated back to you through the targeted refund program. But there's not a lot we can do with the fact that your property's worth more than it used to be. Now, if everybody's property was going up in value, property taxes wouldn't change. But what's happening is there's some pockets in St. Louis County, for example, where valuations are going up fast. And so what ends up happening is they pick up a larger share of the property tax burden, and then in some of our smaller towns where values aren't going up, their taxes actually go down. So it's a complicated process. Roger Moe, former longtime leader in the Senate, gave me some advice one time when I was running for governor in 2010. He said, "Tom, if someone asks you about property taxes, tell them they're too high and move on. Don't explain the system." It is a pretty complicated system, but it's a good thing people's valuations are going up, but it has an impact on your pocketbook unless everybody's are going up.
Yep, and especially seniors, from what I'm hearing on here, Representative Sundin,
Sure.
It seems like the House Tax Committee is looking at property tax relief.
Yes.
Are you up to speed on that, or anything?
A little bit. I'm going to back it up a few years when we did address the property tax issue with the refund program. We added money to the program and actually changed the threshold a little bit so more people could actually apply for it and successfully get it. And we're very proud of that work. I don't know, gosh, what was it, 6 years ago, thereabouts?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, but I guess one of the problems with that program is it's underutilized. There a lot of people, maybe they assume they don't qualify, but it doesn't cost anything to apply for it. Every 15th of August, you have to have your application in. And I would encourage anybody that wants to complain about their taxes to do something about it and do apply for that.
We spend a lot of money on it. I believe last time I looked, it's over $300 million a year that the state rebates back to property owners through the property tax refund program.
Great.
So,
Yes.
well, given the surplus that we have now, everybody's got ideas on how to spend it, and I think pumping some more money into that program and raising that threshold a little bit certainly couldn't hurt.
Great. Well, we're going to get through some more questions from viewers. Somebody wants to wants an update. considering high price in gas, where are we at with the Northern Lights Express and the train proposed from this area down to the Twin Cities?
You know, I think it's a pretty hard sell right now. I never say something's not going to happen, but it's not going to happen this year. I mean, what's happened to us is the Southwest Light Rail from Minneapolis out to Egan and Eden Prairie is hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, and no one can figure out why. The legislature, the Senate, with a unanimous vote, asked for an audit of that project, that Southwest Light Rail project. We thought it was going to be about $900 million. That thing's going to come in at a couple $2 billion to build. So I think there's an awful lot of apprehension until we learn more about what happened with Southwest Light Rail, why the cost went up so exponentially. I don't think the legislature is going to take on another passenger rail project.
Before the state of Minnesota is going to invest that, a more enormous amount of money to make this happen, I think the triggering point is going to be the price of gas. And as soon as it hits $5 a gallon or maybe more, that's going to really trigger the interest in the Northern Lights Express. And people will be commuting and differently and working differently. You know, if they're riding a train, they can still open up their laptop and keep on plugging. But it's going to be economically driven. Great.
Another question from a viewer: any movement on selling wine and alcohol in grocery stores this year?
You know, that issue has been around as long as I've been in the legislature, and all of a sudden we don't hear about it any longer. Mm-hmm. When grocery stores started putting a second entrance in, that was kind of took all the wind out of that argument. I've never been supportive of it, just because I've always been very sensitive to our little municipal liquor stores. I can just tell you, in the little town of Cook that I grew up in, that little muni in that town nets out about $200,000 a year in net profits to the city. That otherwise would be property taxes. Mm-hmm. So the notion that in those towns that have munis, it's probably a pretty significant property tax increase if you allow people to buy their alcohol in a grocery store. But grocery stores certainly can do it. They just need to have a separate entrance. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are starting to do it. In the case of Super One up here, they've decided, in Virginia, I just went through there today. They've got a standalone building, but it's right alongside the grocery store. But I haven't heard anything about that issue now since people started to put second entrances in.
Yeah. Anything to add, Representative Sundin?
Tom points out a good economic distinction there. The bigger stores can do this. The smaller ones cannot afford to invest into this type of delivery of the alcohol, wine, spirits, whatever. And it's a typical story about the big dogs can do it and the little guys get left behind.
Great. Well, in real time here, one of the viewers was very interested in the tax rebate conversation, but wanted to get a little further clarified. Senator Bakk, how do you go about getting that tax rebate or applying for it?
The property tax one?
Rebate, yes.
I go to the Department of Revenue's website, mm-hmm. and there's a link on there where you can go to forms, mm-hmm. and click on the form that says it's PTR, property tax refund, okay. and just print the form off. And if someone needs some help with it, call my office. We'll send a form in the mail to you. But it's pretty easy to download at the Department of Revenue's website.
Great.
I believe they have forms available at most libraries as well. So
great, thank you. Senator Rude has a bill to raise the limits on walleyes this year. Representative Sundin, are you familiar with the bill?
I think it's change it to I think it was a statewide 4 walleye limit, and mm-hmm. I haven't weighed in on it. I haven't paid that much attention to it myself, but I think it'd be a lot easier rather than looking at all the different lakes. You know, I don't want to break the law. I'm certainly capable of it if I don't know what the limits are, you know, on various lakes. So I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Okay.
No, it's not going to happen. DNR doesn't even support it. They manage lakes individually now. In the case of Lake Vermilion, where I live, the limit's 4. Mm-hmm. They can change limits. I don't think the legislature should get into the business of managing game and fish. We just don't have the expertise to do that. That needs to be left to the department. If we start setting limits like that in the legislature, the next thing is we're going to determine when the seasons are, And I just think that needs to be left to the department. And there's, I mean, you take a look at the boundary waters, for example. There's 1,100 lakes there in my district where you can't have a motor on them, right? Mm-hmm. Why would we go to 4 fish in those lakes? You know, there's not a resource question. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty certain it's not going to happen. Not this year, at least.
Does your opinion hold true with predator control too?
All right, next up, another question about climate change legislation. This viewer is wondering, are there any climate change bills currently being considered, and what is the likelihood of passage? Representative Sundin, we'll go with you first.
Most of those go through the Energy Committee, and I'm not on that, and some of them through DEED. We deal with a little bit of climate control, I guess, with the ag bill. You know, there's some new varieties of wheat coming out of the ground, some perennial wheat and those type of things that are lower till methods for growing, and I'm supportive of the research going on there. So other than that, no, I'm not on that committee. So.
Yeah, I'm not on energy either, but I will say I support the idea of electric vehicles, and they're going to, I think they'll become more popular as the price of gasoline is probably going to be sustainably higher than we've known it to be. They're awful expensive. So there's kind of 2 issues around electric vehicles, I think, that the legislature is going to have to get their arms around. One is currently the gas tax is what funds our road construction and our road maintenance, plowing, maintaining, everything. And as we move away from gasoline as the fuel source, we're going to have to figure out how we replace that money that goes into the constitutionally dedicated highway fund. Mm-hmm. And there have been a few proposals around to potentially raise the annual license tabs on electric vehicles and park that money in the highway fund. In an election year, probably not going to go anywhere. People don't want to write campaign literature that says you raise someone's taxes. So it's probably not going to happen, but it does need to happen. The other thing, you know, and the governor's been pushing pretty hard on building out infrastructure, because right now it's kind of hard to find a place to charge an electric vehicle. That infrastructure's got to get built out this year, and I think we will probably make some headway on that. And then there's the issue of, and I was just having a conversation with a legislator the other day about these electric vehicles, and I said, you know, General Motors and Ford can make all the electric vehicles they want. But if you don't have the critical minerals that you need to make the batteries, they're never going to drive them out of Detroit. So we are going to have to figure out, as we ramp up electric vehicles, where is all that copper, nickel, lithium, cobalt, where's it all going to come from? I can tell you I was incredibly disappointed when earlier this year I read the New York Times 3 days in a row ran like a full-page story on what happened to the world's cobalt supply. About 60% of the world's cobalt comes out of the Congo. And that was, a large piece of that was owned by American companies. And the way the story read in the New York Times, both the Obama administration and the Trump administration absolutely just fell asleep. They got so obsessed with Afghanistan that they were not paying attention to what was happening in the Congo. And China came along, and those American companies sold that cobalt resource to China. So now China owns most of the world cobalt that we're going to need to build batteries. You need cobalt for the battery, and lithium and nickel. And that's going to be, I think, the big challenge going forward, is where are these metals going to come from to make the transition to this renewable energy economy.
Yeah. Well, both of you are retiring this year from the legislature after a number of years of service. So a couple of questions. This one's a little different. Do you have an idea how much time legislators spend fundraising while they are in session?
Too much. Really?
I don't think I do any, actually.
Okay.
We're prohibited from taking any money from any lobbyists or PACs during the legislative session. I think most people don't, especially after you've been around a while. You're busy with the session. You don't have time to be doing that. But although I did do some fundraising this session, when we had the tribute for Senator Tomasoni, my good friend and your former senator, on March 1st, I made some calls and raised quite a bit of money for Never Surrender here in Hermantown, the nonprofit that supports people with ALS. So there's some events that happen for nonprofits like that where legislators kind of use their position to raise some money for charitable purposes. And I think the public doesn't understand sometimes the reach that a legislator has to help a nonprofit that they support. And this summer I'm gonna do my golf event again this year. I wasn't going to because I'm retiring, but I've decided to do it. And I'm going to try, because I won't be raising money for a campaign, I'm going to pick a nonprofit to raise some money for, and I expect, probably be able to raise $50,000 for the nonprofit that we select. So it's, and I've been doing a food shelf event in December, every December since 2006, to raise money for the food shelves in the AOA service territory, Proctor, Hermantown, and North. And some years we've raised up to $150,000 that night to help the food shelves in northern Minnesota. I think we're probably bumping up against $1.5 million that we've raised with that event. So there's a lot of legislators that do kind of use their position as a way to raise some money for charitable purposes that they care about also. It's not just raising money to run a campaign.
Sure. And it's illegal, as you said, to raise money from lobbyists and those sorts of groups during the legislative session.
During session, but a lot of legislators, Tom's fortunate, I'm fortunate, we never had to work real hard for the money, but some people are just obsessed with raising money for a party, for themselves, and it's a distraction is what it is at the end of the day. I went down to St. Paul to work for the people. I didn't go down there to keep raising money for my own campaign. Yeah. So there's such a concentration on the money aspect, and that's the part of the politics I just did not enjoy.
Yeah. Well, and Senator Bakk, you raised the name of Dave Tomasoni, a friend of all of ours at the table and most folks down at the Capitol, retiring as well, and a very emotional bill signing this last week around the funding, $25 million, $20 directly to ALS research. I'm going to start with Representative Sundin to just talk about the importance of that funding and talk about Senator Tomasoni as one of probably the longest serving legislators currently retiring from northeastern Minnesota. Heard a statistic recently that over 500 years of legislative service is going to be retiring this legislative session. And Senator Tomasoni holds a fairly significant chunk of that in his time. I wasn't going to mention that either. Both of the Iron Range legislators retiring, but Representative Sundin, you want to talk a bit about that ALS funding and Senator Tomasoni?
Certainly, there's a little bit of resistance on that funding measure, but the people are thinking a little too small. I think that was such a good effort for such a good man. Even if I wasn't never real close with Senator Tomasoni, but always, whenever I saw him, it was friendly and it was great, and you knew he was respected by everyone in his community and everybody that sent him down to St. Paul. A lot of people are very fortunate to work closely with him. I wasn't one of them, but my seatmate, Representative Listlegard, took on that banner and really worked hard in the House to make certain that happened. And it was a very emotional day for Representative Listlegard. I'm so very proud of the work that he did. And I guess that's kind of a testament to the quality of people that we get to work with down there.
Yeah. As a fellow former Iron Range legislator, the time you spend together is immense. And I know he's a dear, dear friend of yours. It's very unusual to have a bill like that happen so early in session to spend that amount of money. Why don't you take some time talking about our friend Dave? We have been hooked at the hip for more than a couple decades at the legislature, almost 3 decades. And I'll never forget the day. I mean, this time last year, he was having some trouble with his left arm. And we're in the same office suite in the Capitol. And so I remember him telling me, I'm going to the doctor Friday because I'm having this trouble with my arm. I can't get my arms up and fold my collar down after I tie my tie. And
And my response was, geez, David, yeah, man, I got arthritis in my shoulders and I can't get my belt through my back loops anymore. Some days my wife has to do it. And so we kind of were joking about how, geez, this getting old is it's really tough. And so he was going, it's a very hard disease to diagnose. So there was a number of, we kind of work Monday through Thursday, and Fridays for most people is a day to be home, meetings in your district. Get caught up on some of the work that got pushed aside during the week when your office is just spinning with people coming and going and committee hearings. And so Friday's kind of a day to get caught up and spend time back in your district. Well, this time last year on Fridays, David was going to the doctor at Fairview up in Hibbing. And so I'll never forget the Monday morning when he came in, and in June last year. And he came in, so I immediately went to his office there in our suite, and I said, David, what did you find out Friday at the doctor? And he said, and he had a hard time saying it. He said, I've got ALS. And my heart just sank, because we had a former senator from Granite Falls die from it in 2011, Senator Gary Kubley. So I had some idea what it was about, and I said, so, David, what's the prognosis? And he said, they told me there's nothing they can do. And my heart just sank. And so then over the course of this summer, we started to talk some about, geez, is there anything we can do? We maybe can't help you, but is there anything we can do for the next person that gets diagnosed? And what we learned is there's been very, very little research done on ALS because it affects a pretty small cohort of people. It was first diagnosed back in the 1860s, and it didn't really get a national name until Lou Gehrig got it in 1939, and then he died in 1941, and it kind of started to become Lou Gehrig's disease. But because it affected so few people, about 450 people in Minnesota at any given day have it. About 2 die every week, and about 2 more get diagnosed. But because there's only about 5,000 people in the country that have it in any given year, it just wasn't the kind of a disease that a lot of research dollars were driven to. Research dollars get driven to places where you can do the most good, where the most people potentially are impacted. So it's something that we don't know how curable it is. We don't know, is there a drug that can put it into remission, if not cure it, at least slow it down, because the research just hasn't been done. And so of all the bills that I've ever carried, and there's been a lot over the decades, I have never ever, and Senator Tomassoni was the chief author of it, but I had to shepherd it through the process as the second author. I've never ever carried one that was so hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this money going to predominantly will go to the University of Minnesota and the Mayo Clinic, some to Essentia, the grant program, because they're all doing some ALS research now. This will take it to a whole nother level. Matter of fact, the main doctor at the University of Minnesota, when he testified on the bill, said this is a game changer in the research area. So our hope is, and David and I have talked about this, is that maybe someday that when someone gets diagnosed, there'll be some kind of a treatment of some kind. And wouldn't it be wonderful if that research that led to some drugs that could help mitigate the impacts of ALS or maybe cure it was developed in Minnesota? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And our Minnesota research institutions, the whole medical device industry, much of the medical device work that's being done in the world is being done in Minnesota. Pacemakers started here in 1946, and so Minnesotans and our research, we've changed the health of the world in a big way. And I'm hopeful that that our bright research minds in the state are going to be able to change this disease also. But it's been an emotional time for all of us that have been so close to a colleague. I can tell you, to a person in the Senate, everybody would tell you that David Tomassoni is the most liked member of the state Senate. He doesn't have a partisan bone in his body. He just wants to do good work, and he's going to be badly missed by the Senate. Republicans, Democrats, everybody alike. He's just a wonderful person.
Yeah. And as I said before, both of you also retiring this year after time serving on the school board and in the House and the Senate. Representative Sundin, do you have any advice for those coming after you in how they could be a good legislator? Biggest lesson you learned in elected office in the House of Representatives?
Get your decision-making process in line and maintain it, okay? I went down there to serve the people of my district. Secondly, I went down there to serve the state of Minnesota. The last is the party. Okay, the party gets you there, helps you get there, and it's important to get started. But never forget who you're serving. It's been just an honor beyond belief to go down there. You know, the people that raise their hand and get sworn in on opening day, you've been there, and it's about 5,000 people have had that opportunity to raise their hand and swear allegiance to the state. And I'm so proud of every last person that has served, because I feel that commitment every day, and it's an honor.
And we just have 60 seconds left to kind of wrap up over a quarter century in the legislature. Last thoughts, Senator Bakk?
I think for new people, search out a mentor. And I was very fortunate when I came in. Irv Anderson from International Falls was the speaker. Doug Johnson, my senator, long-time tax chair at the time. A mentor is really, really important to help you learn the process. And then to Mike's point, remember that you represent everybody, not just the people that voted for you. And sometimes the party might be disappointed, your party might be disappointed in some of the votes you take, but everyone just needs to remember everybody deserves the right to be represented, not just the ones that voted for you. So that's critically important. And then to a new member, I'd say, find an area that you're really passionate about, whether it's in education or ag or taxes or health and human services, and get good at one area of the legislature, because the breadth of it all is just too big to be an expert at everything. But get really good at something, and then other caucus members will look to you for advice and counsel.
Great. Well, we are out of time, and I'd like to thank Representative Mike Sundin and Senator Tom Bakk for being here this week. Join me again next Sunday for another edition of Minnesota Legislative Report, when we will welcome more legislators from northern Minnesota to the program. For the team at WDSC, I'm Tony Sertich. Have a great evening.